Welcome in to the Fill in the Blanks podcast. I am Jarvis Davis. I have my co-host with me, Tanitra Batiste. And Tanitra, we have a very special guest, as you can see, and all of our followers and listeners out there and
Yeah.
viewers. We have a very special guest in today, Sekou Smith, writer for NBA.com, host for the Hang Time podcast, and also just an all-around, all-world man for NBA TV. He's also a Zoom expert. He's an IT guy. So you have any questions about Zoom and you've been struggling with it working from home, hit my boy Sekou up. Sekou, what's up, man?
Man, listen, I'm getting my lighting right. I mean, what else you need?
Yeah. What's up,
This pandemic
Sekou?
has turned me into an
Yeah.
expert
Yeah.
of all things from the home office, man. Whatever y'all need, I'm here for it.
All right, Sekou, man. With all the practices going on down there in the bubble, I know you haven't made your way down there yet. I know you say you're going to be going down there in August, to try to finish that thing on out. But man, just to kind of start off, man, like how is it that we know with John Rondo and J.R. Smith coming out being really negative about what's going on in the living circumstances down there. Um, are there any players that you may have talked to that said there are some positives they may be able to pull from being down there?
Oh yeah, man. Look, there are a lot of guys who are down there who are really just happy to get the season back started again. I think the social media stuff about the meals and the accommodations, that's funny for some people, but I think at this time it's a little off kilter for me because I understand the sacrifices that a lot of people down there are making to put this thing on, and I think for some of the players, they'll get more and more comfortable with the circumstances, and it's a shock to everybody's system. I get that, but it's a little over the top to be complaining about good meals, safe, comfortable accommodations just because they don't look like the Four Seasons or the Ritz-Carlton like you used to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got to understand what's going on and kind of factor that into it before you get on social media and start clowning, the meals. I mean, there's people working hard to make all this stuff possible. And I think some of those guys, some of it is tongue in cheek. Some of them have a little fun with it. But a lot of players, if you look, I thought one of the best ones I saw was the other day, Ben McLemore was eating his breakfast. Like on camera. He was like, I don't know about y'all, where y'all from. He's like, but I got eggs Benedict pancakes. He was like, this is good eat, So it's all about your perspective and kind of how you're taking it. This is an unprecedented time for everybody. And to be thrust into that environment is a shock to everybody's system. So I'm giving guys a little leeway in terms of how they respond to it.
Yeah, and I would imagine, Sekou, especially with us being here in Atlanta, there are 8 teams full of players, staff, coaches, et cetera, who would love nothing more than the opportunity to be in that bubble so that they could keep, playing the 2019-2020 season, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Lloyd Pierce will trade places with you, and some of those Hawks players would love to be a part of it. Because look, no matter what you say about how things have gone down, this was something that was out of everybody's control.
Sure.
So it's not like you can point a finger at somebody and say you did this or this, you messed this up. The coronavirus, as I've come to learn, like everybody else, man, it is an equal opportunity destroyer. Like it could care less about who you are, where you're from, what your circumstances are. It's ravaging, families, taking loved ones, making people sick, giving them long-term health issues. I mean, this is not something to be toyed with. This notion that it's a hoax or something to be laughed at, to me, is really upsetting when I think about it. I mean, I had some conversations with people a few months ago, and even back March 11th, I was working the night Rudy Gobert tested positive. I was going on set at NBA TV that night with Sam Mitchell and Jerry Greenberg. So this notion that anybody's life is to be joked about or, just disregarded during something like this is really upsetting to me, because you're downplaying the seriousness of something that's going to leave a lot of people damaged for years to come.
Yeah, and Jarvis, I just want to follow that up and ask Sekou. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think it's one of those things where, and forgive me because it depends on your vantage point, but whether it's something like a 9/11 or something like a Hurricane Katrina, you'll never forget where you were and what you were doing in that moment when you heard, oh my God, Rudy Gobert, oh my God, the league has come to a halt, sports has come to a halt. And like you say, Sekou, I was actually leaving the Hawks game because I had to get up at 5:30 a.m. for the morning show. So I left at halftime, just kind of listened to the rest of it on my way home, got ready for the show, tuned back in, and I'm like, the world just stopped.
Yeah.
It's a surreal moment that I don't think any of us will forget. And then I was telling Jarvis as well, it's kind of weird because you also have these points on a calendar, right? That for life, related to sports, that point is kind of like, oh, okay, that's when that's supposed to happen. That's when that's supposed to happen. So for me, it's always been the NBA finals either land on my birthday, like, last game lands on my birthday, or my birthday right in the middle of the NBA finals. So I was wondering how difficult or how challenging or surreal is this for you, that instead of your NBA season ending in June, it's restarting in July. Then it's going to potentially wrap up no later than October 13th. Then you got to get right back at it for the regular season in December.
Yeah, it is definitely a shock just to the calendar. For 20 years now, I've been used to the NBA schedule. Like, my birthday is May 15th. I'm usually never home on my birthday. I'm usually on the road somewhere covering a playoff game. March 11th is etched into my brain, forever now. That's the night that the league and really the sports world came to a halt, because the NBA was the first league to shut it down, and everybody else followed from there. It was, that. And again, I have to remind myself not to be too selfish in thinking about it. Like, a lot of other things that could be going on, than me worrying about not being on the road in the playoffs, or not having the NBA finals wrapped up and doing free agency in July 1st. And, whatever our normal schedule was, everything has been disrupted in my little world. And my kids had to come home early from college, school shut down. My wife and her job, she's a teacher. They shut down and went to remote learning, So it's everybody's normal got trashed. And again, by no fault of anything any of us did to cause it. I mean, this was something that literally came out of nowhere. I've learned so much. I've listened and read and discussed so much medical stuff now, man. If I could just turn it back, and go back to high school and actually pay attention in some of my science classes, I'd be so happy right now.
Right.
I was not listening on some of those parts when we talk about the effects of, a global pandemic and what it could do to, I'm thinking about all the people who've lost jobs, based on this, the restaurants and the other, businesses that haven't been able to operate such as normal. It's crazy. I mean, I remind myself that I'm blessed to be working, and that this NBA season could come back. It's huge. I mean, it's not only a release for a lot of people who need something to distract them from the reality of what's going on. It's also an economic engine for a lot of folks, myself included, whose livelihood depends on the NBA playing basketball.
Speaking of getting adjusted to a new norm, when things get going on July the 30th and the games start being played, there's going to be a different look. The players are going to be allowed to have sayings on their jerseys and monikers. Like, what's kind of the buzz amongst the players? I know there were some players who were kind of upset that they weren't able to actually have a say so in what sayings they could put on those jerseys. But like right now, like what's your vibe that you get from some of the players that have an opportunity to be able to basically silently protest throughout the entire game?
Well, it's interesting, Jarvis. They all get a say so, and
Okay.
whether they want to participate or not, or what they want the back of their jerseys to say, and I think that's fantastic. I've long been a proponent of the freedom of speech per se to extend to athletes. I was always conflicted, when if an athlete said something, people would be like, oh, they shouldn't be talking, or they shouldn't say this, or you could get fined for something you say. And I'm like, why? Like, what's wrong with having a thought about something? Now, when you talk about putting stuff on jerseys and making statements with your uniform, that's a whole other can of worms you're opening up for some of these leagues. The NFL famously has been super strict. Like, they didn't even want to let somebody put a RIP to somebody on a cleat, which to me is just that's nutty to not allow players to express themselves in that way. I think the coordination of it was smart on the NBA's part, and I don't want to take away from the fact that the WNBA players really were the pioneers in that respect. They were the first professional basketball players I know of to react the way they did about, some social justice issues way back, Trayvon Martin, era. So, I mean, they were ahead of that curve, but certainly the NBA players have been very vocal about it, very vigilant, being at the front of the movement, for a lot of people. The Black Lives Matter, the protests, you look up across the country, NBA players, on the West Coast, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, all the way back, here to Atlanta, Jaylen Brown driving down from Boston to take part in the march here in his hometown of Atlanta. I mean, come on, man. You have such a huge platform if you're these players. You got to be responsible with it first and foremost. And I think that's what we're going to see on the backs of a lot of these jerseys. Just how do you become somebody who's an agent for change and responsible in this time that is so delicate for a lot of people. I mean, it's obviously a lot of, frayed, feelings about what's going on, and it should be. I mean, as Black men, and as just men, period, men and women looking at what's going on, you should feel some type of way about it.
I think one of the things that you mentioned, you talk about that responsibility. Like, how has LeBron been able to handle that and be the face of it, the face of the NBA, the face of his own brand, the face of everything off the court with the schools and everything? How has LeBron just been able to do this, man? Like, because I'm amazed. I'm just amazed at what he's been able to accomplish off the court, not only on the court.
Yeah, he's built different. I think I often tell people that LeBron, in my mind's eye, he's the first like superstar, like uber global superstar of the social media age. He's the first one I can think of who's grown up with it. Like, from the time he hit our consciousness, the technology has been traveling at light speed. So he's the first one to really be raised in the midst of this. Some of our other superstars, athletes that we've seen over the years they didn't have this technology that was a part of their regular, their normal day, like daily operation. Like, who has ever had the opportunity to reach as many people as he has, in terms of his social media footprint or his impact based on the platforms that he's able to access on his own. Like, he used to have to come through us as gatekeepers of the media, whereas now these players have an opportunity to go directly to their fans. So, I mean, all of that has been on his shoulders from the time he was 16 years old. I saw him for the first time on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And I had heard about him. Like, I had other reporter friends in Ohio who were telling me, like, yo, when you see this kid, LeBron James, you know how many times I've heard that over the years?
Yeah.
Being in the business, like somebody telling you that the next big thing. But this is the next big thing that actually lived up to the hype.
Yes.
You know what I mean? This is the first guy who had that kind of hype and lived up to it. So LeBron almost, if he didn't assume the responsibilities that he has on and off the court as a role model, as an agent for change in his community back in Akron and beyond. Man, what a story we'd be talking about. Like, what a different narrative we'd be crafting about this guy, maybe not taking advantage of all of the things at his disposal. So I commend LeBron. Whether you like him as a basketball player or not, whether you want to argue he is or isn't the greatest player you've ever seen, all that stuff, you have to respect him as a man and as a guy who has decided he'd rather stand up for what he believes in or what he feels most passionate about, as opposed to not embracing that responsibility. Now, not everybody would have handled it the way he did. I think that's what makes him unique and really one of the special athletes we've seen in our lifetime, whether we like his game or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm thinking about the fact that there's another side to this Sekou as well. Obviously, that's the player side, right? But another thought that I had, and it's just, I've been reading around, kind of looking to see what people's thoughts are from a journalist perspective, right? Because this is a very unique time for us as journalists. And granted, we always have to be objective in our storytelling and our delivery of the news. But on the same token, as journalists of color, particularly Black males who are seeing what's going on in the world, how do you leverage that in terms of definitely still telling the story, but also being responsible from a conscious perspective? And I ask that question because, I've talked to my mentors over the years, just in terms of like the lens that I might see a story through, and I know what the other layers of the story are because I am African American versus just the lens as a journalist. So how do you manage through dealing with that piece, African American male journalist, especially covering a lot of Black males?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that I think a lot of us wrestle with all the time. Long before now, I used to sit and wonder, like, are we telling this story the right way? Because when I started out in this business, and it's been 20, I don't want to date myself too bad, but it's been 25, 26 years, like, where my first time going to SEC media days, I covered colleges before I covered the NBA. I covered the SEC. And I was one of two, I think, beat writers at my first SEC media days. I was one of two beat writers that wasn't a white male or female. So, and I'm looking in the room, we're in Birmingham, and I'm at I think it's the Wyndham Hotel or one of them, and I'm looking in this room with all these reporters, and it didn't even dawn on me. I was fresh out of college. I was just happy to be covering SEC football, basketball, and I could have cared less. It didn't even dawn on me what the racial makeup of the room was going to be. But I got in there, and that was like the first time I noticed. I was like, wow. And you become conscious of it over the years. Now, I will say that covering the NBA, there's a diversity in the coverage to me in the NBA that may be greater than any other sport that I can think of. In terms of men, women, there's certainly not enough. There's certainly not enough women covering the league. I certainly think you could have a more diverse group, but it's easily the most diverse group of sports writers that I've seen covering any sport. And that includes NFL, soccer, anything else, baseball. So, to me, we have a responsibility as journalists, first and foremost, to tell stories as honestly and as clearly as we can. I think truth, people talk about truth all the time, or, objectivity in the sense of, well, that's different for everybody. I think everybody brings their own perspective to what we're doing. What you have to try and do, I think, is be as true to what you believe the story to be as possible. And there have been inequities in coverage for a long time. I was the first Black beat writer at the Clarion Ledger in Jackson, Mississippi, which is Mississippi's largest newspaper, to ever cover the SEC teams.
Wow.
And that's a joke because there were some Hall of Fame world-class writers to come through that state before me who just didn't get the opportunity to do it. I just happened to come along at a time when things were changing. But the great Roscoe Nance, rest his soul, he worked at that same paper but covered the SWAC instead of covering the SEC schools. So I'm conscious of where we are on the timeline of how things work and what society is willing to fight for. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be conscious of that as reporters. We're historians in a lot of ways as well. We don't just chronicle games. We are chronicling history, sports history.
Yeah.
And I've always been conscious of that since I started doing this, to make sure I'm mindful of that. So we're telling the whole story. I don't like to say the true story or, whatever. Our responsibility is to try and tell the whole story, to tell, all facets of it. So readers and people consuming it can, form their own opinions about what they've read, but give them the most rounded version of whatever has gone on, so they don't have to wonder about motives and don't have to question, somebody's backstory. Funny thing, and this is something that I thought of as a kid growing up, reading newspapers. I read bylines not ever knowing what color somebody was. It was only columnists and the pictures that you would even know.
Right. Yeah.
So like I laugh when people see my name, they don't know what my two middle names are. They just see my first name, my last name. And before the internet, I've been doing this that long, before the internet was a thing, and people used to assume you were.
Yeah, been that long, Sekou, man.
Yeah, people used to assume you were whatever ethnicity your name suggested you were. So I used to have people always thinking I was Asian or something like that, which used to crack me up. I'd be like, I guess you could look at the name and not know, but it's like that. To me, there was some beauty in that anonymity you had before we had all these different access points for who was delivering the news to us. I kind of like being ignorant to what color my favorite writers were back in the day, because I just knew the name. I didn't know what color they were, whether they were old, whether they were male or female. It was based on the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that those are some of the things that we are definitely trying to move towards, man, and not have to worry about assessing whether or not you're black, white, old, fat, skinny, or all those things that you just don't want to have to take into consideration. But I think as we move towards that, I think we have to kind of get those things out of the way first, and then say, okay, now how good are you? And then if you're good, you'll get those opportunities, and that's what we all should shoot for, and working in this industry as minorities. So, Sekou, man, I got one last question for you, man. Give me a team that nobody is talking about that might come out of this thing with a ring.
It's funny you mentioned that, because we've been doing these team by team podcasts as we get ready for the restart here down in Orlando at the Bubble. And, it's so hard to sort through because of how unprecedented this time is. And we've never had this kind of circumstance. So you wonder, like, could there be a Butler in this mix? Could there be, a Cinderella team in this mix that could get hot and just go off? The only and I think everybody has talked about kind of the usual suspects, that the favorites, then the kind of the next tier teams. If I was looking at this entire 22 team field, and I know that 16 of them are going to be in the playoffs. So those teams that I'm looking at and saying these are playoff teams, the strange team to me that could really kind of upset the order of things. I don't know if they could win a ring, but I think they could be kind of that disruptor in Orlando. I think it's Oklahoma City. And it's a team I did not even factor into the mix going into this year. When they traded Russ to Houston and Chris Paul went there, I was expecting TP never to suit up with the Thunder. I certainly didn't expect him to be in a position starting out with these 8 seeding games in Orlando to have an opportunity to go further up the, pecking order in the West. I mean, they're in a position, if they play well in these seeding games, they not only would be in a prime position in terms of matchups, but they could get a top 4 seed, which you don't get the home court advantage that comes with that anymore. So that's kind of out the window. But just the idea that you'd be able to dictate the matchup you would have in that first round and beyond is really stunning to me. And they're talented enough, and they got the one guy to me whose leadership qualities shine through in a playoff setting. The way Chris Paul had Houston in a position to knock off the Warriors 3 years ago, and I was there. I covered that whole, Western Conference playoffs that year. I was in Houston, back and forth, watching all those games. Mm-hmm. Chris Paul is the kind of guy who could drive a team to that point where they could be a real disruptor in these playoffs. And I think as much as people talk about Portland, and I think rightly so because of the guys they've gotten back that are healthy, Portland is a super dangerous team if they could find a way to make up that 3.5 games and get into the Western Conference playoffs. But the Thunder are already in the mix. Like, we already know they're going to be in that playoff field, and nobody's talking about them being a factor in the West. I think they could be a team that scares somebody.
He is Sekou Smith, NBA writer for NBA.com and host of the Hang Time podcast. Sekou, man, we definitely, Tanisha and I know I can definitely speak for her on this. Like, we definitely appreciate you giving us some time this week, man. And hopefully you can come back, man, if you can handle it, right?
And meanwhile, I'll be over here envying you once you do get there. Even though I know it's going to be kind of scary, but man, I just think it's going to be such an exciting time down in Orlando.
It is. It's gonna be crazy. Sean Powell is down there for us now from
our buddy Sean.
And we're gonna do a handoff next month. Let's hope he stays healthy while he's down there, and let's hope I make it there in one piece and finish it out.
Well, definitely safe travels as you go down there, man. And also, we want to thank you all, everybody, all our viewers for checking us out and get some of this good teaching from this NBA talk from my guy Sekou, for Jarvis Davis, Tanisha Batiste. We'll see y'all next week, same time, same place, Tuesday at 4:00 on the Fill in the Blanks Facebook page. We'll see y'all next week.
See ya. Thanks, Sekou.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all.